Okay, let's start with the first question. Now, in this chapter, we're going to talk about written language. In the previous chapters, we talked about spoken language, right? But now, we're going to talk about written language. But first of all, we need to define writing. What is writing? What do we mean by writing? Writing is the symbolic representation of language through the use of graphic signs. Graphic signs. What does that sound? Graphic signs. Like what? Okay. Calculator. Graphic signs. This is a graphic sign, right? Isn't it? This is a graphic sign. Graphic sign. Graphic sign. Graphic sign. So these are graphic signs, right? So, but these signs are symbols. Symbols that represent the language that we speak. So, symbols represents the spoken language. And this is called writing. We use some symbols that represent the sounds that we produce. So these sounds are represented through these graphic signs, and we call it writing. Okay? Writing, yazma ne demek? Yazma, bazı semboller vasıtasıyla konuştuklarımızı sunma çabasıdır, eylemidir. Doğru mu? Yazdığımız her şeyi ve ürettiğimiz her sesi bir takım sembollerle ne yapıyoruz? Grafik işaretlerle yapıyoruz. Buna biz written language diyoruz. Yani yazma. Did you grade it? Yes. Okay. So now second question. What is the difference between writing and speech? Or what is the distinction between writing and speech? What makes them different from each other? Okay. Writing and speech. Of course, there is an obvious distinction between writing and speech. You write, you speak. But here, unlike speech, it is learned consciously. What do you mean by learning consciously? Not all languages have a written form. Some people whose language has a well-established writing system cannot use this system. So, as you remember in the chapters about language acquisition, first language acquisition and second language acquisition, if you remember, we said we learn a language subconsciously. Not consciously, but subconsciously. That means when you learn a language, you're biologically programmed to learn that language, even if you're not instructed, even if you're not taught how to speak. In the end, you'll be able to speak because you learn it, you acquire the language, the spoken language. Whereas writing language, you learn it consciously. You are taught how to write through this graphic signs. All right? And another point, you know, you may have met a lot of people who can speak their native language fluently without any problem, but they cannot write. True? So that means it's different from speech. Why? Because you don't need to be taught to be able to speak, whereas for writing you have to be taught. Okay? It is speech, we can say speech is an innate ability that you will talk anyway in the end, but writing is not like that. If you're not taught, you cannot talk. Right? Suppose that, for example, you are in a community where there are a lot of people who know how to write, and you see them. You are with those people, you live with them, but you're not taught how to write. You will not be able to write. Whereas, if you live in a community speaking a language, and you are exposed to that language, in the end, you'll be able to speak. Why? Because you receive the signals, right? Subconsciously, you produce sentences. But writing is different. Is it clear?
Sorry.
Yes.
Of course, there may be many differences, right? As you said, speech is performed orally.
Yes.
Example?
Speech is performed orally.
Orally, and writing is an action that, how to say, write down symbols on paper, clay, or whatever.
Yes, but the thing is that when you speak, you use your motor skills. Remember?
Yes.
You have to use mouth and your tongue, and you produce sounds through your vocal cords, and your brain helps you to produce sentences. So you use it, and when you do it subconsciously. There's the difference. In writing, you also use some motor skills, like you use your hand and your brain, instruct your hand, and you write. You do that. You can do that, but you have to be taught how to do that. Otherwise, you cannot use your motor skills for writing. There's a difference between speech and writing indeed. Because while speaking also you have to use your motor skills. Okay? You use it. And you don't need to be instructed about using your motor skills, about moving your mouth, your tongue, right?
It is also a difference, of course. But as I said, there are many differences.
Of course, this is the basic difference between speech and writing. Speech is learned subconsciously, whereas writing is learned consciously. This is the main difference.
And it means my answer, yes, is not acceptable, right?
But I didn't really get your answer. You mean speak, okay. We speak orally.
And the other one is just a way of writing down symbols on a paper or whatever.
Yeah,
It's a communication, right? But speech is oral and the other one is not.
of course, we're not interested in that distinction. We're interested in a more subtle distinction. Yani daha ince bir yani herkes biliyor ki yani konuşma ağız yoluyla yapılan bir şey, yazma el yoluyla yapılan yani el vasıtasıyla biz o ayrımdan bahsediyoruz. O zaten obvious. That is something obvious. But what we're concerned about is the way how we learn, acquire that ability, speaking ability,
But
and the way how we learn writing.
But sometimes we learn to speak, for example, a foreign language.
Foreign language.
Foreign language. We learn it consciously, so it's like the right.
yes.
The thing is that we learn it, but we cannot use it. That's the problem. While, for example, we talk about this, like you learn a language, you learn the rules, but you cannot use the rules. You have difficulty in understanding and using the rules of that language. That means you still haven't acquired subconsciously. Because acquiring acquisition requires